Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. All right. So thank you so much for coming. So just to make sure that everyone's in the right room, we are going to be talking about ASP.NET Core, web apps, cloud apps, and containers. Is everyone in the right room? Woo! Hi, my name is Maria Nagaga, and I'm here with...
I'm Daniel Roth.
And we are both program managers on the Visual Studio and .NET team. I am part of the community team that works on taking all your information and making it to products,
And I am a program manager on the engineering team. I work with the ASP.NET devs on building ASP.NET Core.
So I tell you what to do and you go build it.
Pretty much.
Pretty much.
That is generally true.
So what is building a .NET application today? Like the .NET platform has grown, right? You can build a .NET framework application and do Windows to target desktop. So you can do UWP and do all those cool HoloLens applications. We have cloud apps, which has things like .NET Core and ASP.NET Core. And mobile, we have Xamarin, which is cross-platform. So you can build iOS, Android, and Windows application using one code base, right? And we have the common infrastructure at the bottom. We have compilers, the language, and the runtime components all stay the same. And then we have the concept of the .NET standard library that allows you to actually target all these different APIs to build these different applications. In addition to that, the number of tools you can use has grown. Like, we don't only have to have Visual Studio on Windows to build a .NET application. You can use Visual Studio for Mac that has ASP.NET Core support. And we have Visual Studio Code that is a lightweight text editor that is completely cross-platform. But this is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about building cloud applications with ASP.NET Core. So ASP.NET Core 2.0 is here. It's been out for how long now?
About a month. It's hot off the build servers.
So you guys are probably one of the first people to see this complete demo in person.
Yeah, with the RTM bits. Yeah. This is new stuff. Very new.
So what is new with ASP.NET Core 2.0, Dan?
There's quite a bit. So first of all, we did a lot of work to make it a lot easier to get started. We wanted to enable you to get started faster. So fewer files, fewer lines of code, less ceremony, so you can get an app up and running and get some Razor and some dynamically generated HTML working. We also introduced a new application model that we call Razor Pages.
I'm really excited to hear about that one.
It's pretty cool. Razor Pages is a page-based model for building web UI. It's built on top of MVC, so it takes advantage of all the normal MVC features. But it's just a simpler way to build web UI where you just create a page, and then you have some HTML that you can dynamically render. We've also revamped the authentication system to make it easier to configure, so you can't as easily get misconfigurations where middleware are conflicting with each other. We also added some new features to the authentication system for things like two-factor authentication. The templates now have two-factor authentication set up for authenticator apps, as opposed to like using SMS and having to go get an SMS provider and all that.
So I don't have to go and get the Twilio API or SendGrid. It's right out of the box?
Right out of the box. You
Okay.
can just set it up without needing any additional code. We have a bunch of new templates for building single-page applications using Angular, React, React plus Redux. These templates make it as simple as doing file new project to get a full JavaScript setup with pre-rendering and hot module reload and Webpack setup without you having to do any work.
So you don't have to do the Yeoman generator stuff that I used to do in the past?
You can just do file new project. You can create the same projects from the command line. Also, we have the ASP.NET Core backend, of course, set up for you, so you can build web APIs, so you can return some JSON data to your SPA application.
Okay.
We've also turned on page and view compilation by default when you publish your application. That dramatically improves startup performance, and you don't no longer have to turn it on yourself. We just do it for you. In fact, we've improved performance across the board. In addition to startup performance improvements, we've also improved throughput performance by 20% in ASP.NET Core 2.0 over 1.1, which is pretty impressive considering that 1.1 was already pretty fast. We've also improved publish times by making the size of your publish application dramatically smaller.
And we're going to take a look at what that exactly means.
We will see the results of those optimizations firsthand. Lastly, when you're building web applications, problems happen. We really wanted to have a seamless diagnostic story where you can easily get information about errors, see logging, get diagnostics, get telemetry without you having to add any code to your app. And that should work while you're in development in Visual Studio, so you can diagnose errors in Visual Studio, and also when you're running in the cloud in Azure. You get seamless diagnostics using application insights without any additional line of code.
All right, a lot to look at today.
That's not all.
Really?
So, of course, as the .NET platform gets better,
Yeah.
ASP.NET Core gets better. So it wasn't just ASP.NET Core 2.0 that shipped last month. We also shipped .NET Core 2.0, which ASP.NET Core actually ships with. As part of .NET Core 2.0, we now support .NET Standard 2.0. Okay. Now, .NET Standard is a standardized API surface area that all the different .NETs implement, so that when you're writing a library, when you're trying to share some code across all these different platforms, you can write it against a common API surface area, a standard API surface area, .NET Standard, and as long as you target that API, it will just work. .NET Standard 2.0 is a dramatically larger surface area that was introduced, and it adds tens of thousands of APIs that you can now use as part of writing your libraries. And .NET Core 2.0 supports all of it. In fact, we added so many APIs to .NET Standard 2.0 and also to .NET Core 2.0 that we now support a binary compatibility story. You can take your existing .NET Framework libraries and reference them from your .NET Core apps or your .NET Standard libraries, and for the most part, they will just work. As long as they only use the API surface area available in .NET Standard 2.0, they will be just fine. We did a scan of NuGet.org of every single binary on NuGet.org.
That must have been a hard job.
It took a little time. But we looked at basically for each binary all of the APIs that each binary uses and did analysis to see, are these APIs available in .NET Standard? 70% of the libraries that we scanned were just fine, even old libraries that were compiled for like .NET 2.0. The other libraries, the other 30%, a lot of those were libraries that were Windows platform specific, like things that were for WinForms or web forms, those types of things. So for the most part, your libraries should just work. There are a couple of API areas that we know about that we're still fleshing out. We continue to work at this problem so that more and more libraries will just function. Some areas that are known are like system.drawing, system directory services. Those are coming.
System.drawing, I'm looking forward to that.
They're not there yet, but they will be there. But for the most part, most libraries function just fine.
So someone who is building ASP.NET Framework right now and wants to start experimenting with ASP.NET Core right now, this is an exciting time to do it.
A lot of people started out with ASP.NET Core 1.0. They liked the web framework, but then when they look to run on .NET Core, they're like, well, .NET Core 1.0 didn't have a lot of APIs available. So as an initial stepping stone, a lot of people said, well, I'll use ASP.NET Core 1.0. Oh, now it's something very bright in here. And I will, instead of running on .NET Core, maybe I'll just run on .NET Framework. ASP.NET Core supports that. You can run on either. And that allowed you to use all your existing .NET Framework libraries because you're running on .NET Framework. Now that .NET Core 2.0 is out and it supports .NET Standard 2.0, we think a lot of those people will now be able to make the jump, be able to move all the way to .NET Core and take advantage of all the features that .NET Core brings to the table. So if you're an ASP.NET Core dev, what does this mean? It means all those APIs that are now available in .NET Standard, they are there and you can use them like data, XML, serialization, networking, all that stuff is now there. And if you have existing .NET Framework assets, you can continue to use them.
Wow, this is a good leadway to kind of showing some of this stuff at work.
Yeah, we should show it.
Right.
But you're wondering, how do you get the bits?
How'd you get it? Actually, a lot of people are like, okay, that's nice. How do I get started? So to get started with ASP.NET Core 2.0, the first thing you need to go is go and install the .NET Core SDK from .NET/Core. And we'll have all the slides available, so don't worry about if you have to grab them all now. Also, if you want to start writing your code and editing it, you need to install Visual Studio, right? So we have different flavors of Visual Studio that you can find at visualstudio.com. We have Visual Studio for Windows, right, where we have Community, Enterprise, and Professional. We have Visual Studio for Mac, and Visual Studio for Mac now has ASP.NET Core 2.0 support.
It does, supports 2.0.
So you can now start building your ASP.NET Core 2.0 applications right in Visual Studio for Mac on your Mac. That actually sounded pretty double, but
it's true.
but it's
It is true.
Right? And then we have Visual Studio Code, which is our light text editor that is completely cross-platform. So shall we get started?
Let's take a look.
Right. So now we're going to go into demos. No more slides, right? No more slides?
Pretty much.
No more slides. OK. If we show more slides, just tell me off on Twitter. OK. So Dan's over at .net/core. And you can see the different versions that we have available for you to start installing. We have for Windows, right? And if you actually scroll down the page, you're going to see some instructions, right? And this does take 10 minutes. It actually takes 10 minutes for you to get up and running.
That's pretty quick.
It's pretty quick, right?
It didn't take long. Like I downloaded, install it. It's a very lightweight install. Like if you haven't done it already, you should just go ahead and do it. It's a side-by-side install. It's a very low-touch installation on your machine.
We also have the SDK for Linux, right? And we have different distros for Linux that we support as well. We have for Mac, and the instructions for Mac, and we have Docker. And we will be showing you some of these examples throughout the presentation over the hour. Visual Studio, go to visualstudio.com. We have different options like Visual Studio. You have Community, which is our free edition. We have Professional and Enterprise. We have Visual Studio for Mac. And then we have Visual Studio Code.
Oops, that was the wrong zoom in button. There we go.
Yeah, we got it. We got it. It works, right? And this all has debugging enabled, and it all supports ASP.NET Core, which enables us to have a rich developer experience.
A Visual Studio for everyone.
Everyone on every OS.
So I've already done this. I've installed .NET Core 2.0 SDK.
So let's make sure you have the right version.
.NET -- version should tell me that. Yep, 2.0.
2.0, OK.
Good.
So let's build our first ASP.NET Core application. But before we do that, there's one thing we didn't mention. So I want you to type .NET new -H. Now, these are all the different templates that come right out of the box with the .NET CLI. And these are the exact same templates that you would get if you did File New Project, right?
Yeah, exactly the same. Like Visual Studio literally will use these same templates when you do File New Project.
So they match now. They're synergy, synced,
Yep.
everything. OK.
Cool.
So let's create our new application. So .NET new web, .NET new web -O, and let's call it Ignite. Hold on. It did a .NET restore for you.
Yeah, we now do that for you by default. In the past, you may have been used to typing .NET restore after creating a new project. In .NET Core 2.0, we tried to reduce steps, so we now do a restore at all the places that make sense. Like after you create a project, after you add a package, we'll just run restore for you.
So if I added a new package, it would automatically run restore for me?
Yes, it would.
Oh, that completely lightens up my workflow. OK. So let's go ahead and look at this in code.
Sure, we can do code.
I like code.
I like code too. Code's very nice. It's good for text.
I love it for everything. So one of the big features, like with every single article that I've seen coming out from MSDN, on the web dev blog, it's all about how ASP.NET Core 2.0 has been simplified.
Yeah, it's easier to get started with. Less stuff.
Less stuff all around the board. So I always like to check the dependencies to see how much less stuff is in there. So let's go to our CS proj file.
OK.
OK, so there's one package reference.
Yes.
Just the one.
Just the one. This is the only package that you need to write an ASP.NET Core 2.0 application. This Microsoft ASP.NET Core.all. Now, ASP.NET Core in the past, if you've played with it, has lots of packages that you use. All of those packages, this package is a new package, and it's what we call a meta package. It references literally every single ASP.NET Core package and EF Core package. It's all there.
It's all in there.
So you don't need to go hunting around the web trying to figure out which package do I need to get this feature to work. You just use the one package, and it will just work.
OK, before I go into that in detail, another thing I noticed is that there is one version.
Yeah. And it's the version of the product. So before you had lots of packages, and also they all had different versions. And if you use the wrong versions, then things might not work.
Yeah, and had this version that needed to work with that version that needed to work with another version.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So now you just have one version. It's the version of the package, which is also the version of the product. That's all you need to worry about.
So we have this meta package, which sounds pretty big.
It pulls in a lot of packages.
It pulls in a lot of
yeah,
packages. How does that not slow down my publish time?
So, well, I think there's two things. There's the restoring the package, and then there's publish. So restoring this package actually is nearly instantaneous because all the packages are already installed as part of installing the .NET Core SDK.
So when I install the .NET SDK, the packages come with it.
Yeah, and in fact, we can show that real quick. Like if we go to Program Files, .NET SDK, this is where all the versions of the .NET Core SDK that I have installed on this machine are laid down. And you can see I have a number of versions. That's the wonderful thing about .NET Core is it's side-by-side versioning. You can install 15 some odd versions, and it's totally fine. And you see there's this NuGet fallback folder. In here are all the ASP.NET Core and Entity Framework Core packages that have already been pre-installed as part of installing .NET Core. When you restore the meta package using NuGet, NuGet will look in this folder and see, oh, the packages are already here. I don't need to restore them, so restore is still fast. Now, publish is a little different. Publish is the step, often when we talk about publish, you think of like moving bits someplace.
Yeah.
When we talk about publish in .NET Core land, that means that's the step where you gather up all the binaries from those NuGet packages that you're using to put them in one folder so then you can deploy it someplace else, deploying being the actual moving of the bits. And normally, any stuff that you reference in your project file, well, that needs to be gathered up and put in that folder. So in ASP.NET Core 1.1, that often meant like gathering up all the ASP.NET Core binaries and putting them in that folder. That's no longer true in 2.0. In 2.0, we have a new feature in .NET Core called the Runtime Store, which already has all of the ASP.NET Core and Entity Framework Core libraries that are there, pre-installed, they're cross-gen, they're optimized, ready to go. So when you publish, we actually trim out all of those dependencies because we know you don't need them because they're already there. So your published app size is actually significantly smaller, like a lot smaller than 1.1. And we'll see that later, actually. We'll just show an example.
So we've looked at CS Proj has become significantly more trimmed. What else is trimmed down? Like what's going on in program right now?
So in program main, that's where you set up your ASP.NET Core host. That's the thing that's actually, you say, I want to run this, and then it starts listening for requests. In 1.1, you had a bunch of minutia in here that you had to do to set up your host. You had to have a line of code for specifying the server you wanted to use, like use Kestrel is the name of the server we typically use. You had to set up IIS integration if you cared about that. You had to specify your content route. It was all these little things. You no longer have to do any of that. We just take care of it for you using this new default web host builder. The default web host builder will set up Kestrel, set up IIS integration, set up your content route, and do a bunch of other useful things for you by default so that you don't have to. So less code here in program main.
Wow.
And then startup, it's pretty simple too. Like this startup file basically just returns a static string.
OK, let's go ahead and run that application, see what it looks like.
All right, so .NET run. There it goes.
Yeah.
So localhost 5000, and there's a static string. There's a running app.
Well, that's cool, but it's just returning a string.
It's true. It's just a static string.
It's just a static string.
We could probably do better.
Since we're talking about ASP.NET Core, I feel like I need to see a page to feel fulfilled at the end of this demo.
OK, like some HTML.
Yeah, I need some HTML.
Maybe some Razor.
Some Razor in there.
Sure, we can do that. Let's do that. What do you want me to do?
First of all, I need you to configure an MVC. So I need to add that.
Set up MVC. So services.add MVC, add the MVC services. And I don't have to add a package here because it's already included in that meta package. Use MVC. We'll add MVC to the middleware pipeline. OK?
OK. So let's add a page.
Add a page? Like, how do you want me to do that? Like,
so I wanted to add a folder and call it pages because we're adding a page and we're probably going to add a couple of pages.
OK.
Right? So let's add a cs.html.
Like
with
index or something.
Yeah.
All right.
And I want you to add an add page directive. And we'll explain what that is later. And let's just say, hello, everyone in the room.
Hello, and maybe like let's put something that's dynamically generated, like the.
Oh, let's look at date and time.
The time is date time dot. Now, how about that? Is that
that
good?
Sounds good.
Now we got some dynamic content, and then we can run that. There we go. And there it started, and now if we go here and refresh.
All right, so we came to the talk super early.
Yeah.
At 1 o'clock?
Oh, yeah, you know, my laptop, it actually is the time on my laptop. Like for some reason, it didn't update the time zone for East Coast. It's still on West Coast.
Missing Redmond.
Yeah, it's a little homesick.
Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have to keep doing +3 hours for everything I do. Yeah, but that's basically we got some Razor running with just adding a file, just adding a page. So you don't have to go add a controller and add a views folder and work through the convention. You can just add a page in ASP.NET Core 2.0, and that's the feature we call Razor Pages.
Ooh. We've gone into the future of our demo. Okay.
Oh yeah, we'll show more of that in a second.
Okay.
But there's other things that are simple, like it's not just the project file and the hosting layer. Like we've also simplified configuration.
Okay.
So config is a lot easier now. I can show that. Like let me, I'm gonna leave Visual Studio Code now. Like I know you really like it.
Do what you need to do.
I personally prefer working in a fully featured IDE. Something that has all the
bells and whistles.
Something I can be productive with. So let's look back at startup for a second. In startup, you may have noticed if you've done development with ASP.NET Core 1.1, like often we would have like a constructor for the startup class that would set up configuration. Like it would create a configuration builder, and then would add a bunch of sources of configuration data, like appsettings.json, an environment-specific appsettings.json, all these things. And then it would build the config object and make it available to the app. We decided in 2.0 that config is so fundamental that it really should be a service provided by the host, a host-level service. So it actually gets set up now when you create your ASP.NET Core host. Just like you have iHosting environment or iLogger factory, these are host-provided services. Configuration is now a host-provided service. So you can just inject it, an iConfiguration, wherever you need it in your app, in your controller, in your views, in your middleware, in your filters, wherever DI is supported, you can just inject configuration.
Okay.
Also, in that default web host builder that we saw previously, this default web host builder will also add a bunch of useful configuration sources for you by default. So we'll add the config provider for appsettings.json. We'll add the config provider for appsettings.environment.json. For user secrets, we'll add that. For environment variables, and for the command line arguments for the application. That's all just fed into the config system for you when you use the default web host builder.
So if someone wanted to go and see what comes in the default web host builder, could I go and see it on GitHub and then go?
Like an easy way to, I think, if you look at the help text for it. How do I get this to expand? Like the / comment on it actually has like a whole bunch of. Can I expand this like that? Of course we have docs, but the docs are generated. So you can actually read the remarks for that API, and it tells you all the things that it actually does. So that can be a useful way to see what it does. Or just read the code. Like the code's on GitHub, and you can go see all the things that it's adding for you. And then there's the API ref docs on docs.microsoft.com. So let's use it. Like I'm going to add some config someplace. Let's inject some config, and we can add it to our page. Like this page is built on MVC. It is MVC. So let's inject. I'm going to add an iConfiguration right here, that hosting level service. Let's call this property configuration. @inject basically adds a property that will be injected onto your page. Looks like I'm missing a using statement. So @using Microsoft.extensions, I think. Yeah, .configuration, great. That should turn it green. It did. And then let's read from config. So H2, let's access that configuration property, and then let's add a setting called message, something that we're just going to display on the screen. Now I don't have any config data yet that I've set up in my project. I don't have an appsettings.json file, so let's add that. So I'm going to add a new item. Let's create an ASP.NET configuration file. And that'll add me the JSON file, which will get picked up by default because it's set up by the default web host builder. And let's add a property called message, and I don't know, hello from config.
Very fancy.
Very fancy, yes.
Very fancy message.
All right, this app's not running yet, so let's run it. And hopefully, if this is working, we should see not only hello in its current time, but we should also see a message that got pulled out of configuration. Yeah, so that's working. So config is just there by default. We set up all the config providers for you. You can just consume it from through dependency injection.
Okay.
We also simplified logging. Like if you look at that startup file, there's also no code in the configure method for setting up logging providers. In our 1.1 templates, there would be code for adding the debug logger and the console logger. Well, first of all, the default web host builder will add those logging providers for you, so you don't need to add them anymore. And also, because config is now available at the host layer, we can now use config to configure logging. For example, like what the log level is. And we can do that for all the logging providers, not just the console logger, like you only could do that in 1.1. Now you can do it for all the logging providers.
All right.
So for example, if I think the app's already running. If I switch the output window to this ASP.NET Core web server tab, that's kind of a neat little feature.
That's new, right?
Yeah, this is new.
Okay.
This is basically just capturing the console output from the ASP.NET Core app and spewing it out here so you can see it. And you can see I've got some output. If I refresh the page, just to make sure that's updating. Yeah, I'm getting a bunch of info level logs. You guys see that? I don't know if you can see that in the back. It's a bunch of info level logs. Let's configure logging to crank up the volume. Let's turn it up.
So we can see everything.
We're going to see all
everything.
the logs. So let's crank it up to trace level. So I'm going to add a section to config. It's called logging. And I want to set the log level. And let's set the default log level, actually, for everything, like all the categories, all the providers. And we'll set it to, let's set it to trace, which is like the highest level. And I'm going to save. And then let's go back to the output. Let me maybe pin it so we can keep seeing it. And now if I go back and refresh a bunch of times, hopefully, yeah, you see now I'm seeing not just info level logs, but actually debug level logs. Like those are starting to show up. That's the next level higher from info. If we then clear this out and turn it back to information,
you'll just see the info logs, right?
I hope so. That's the goal. And yeah, so now I'm no longer seeing debug level logs. So that's configuring logging from using just the config system and the logging providers just being there by default without you having to do anything.
Wow. So these are all things that are right out of the box, easy to configure, no ceremony whatsoever.
Yeah. So one package, one version. Default web host builder adds a whole bunch of stuff for you. Config is already there. Logging is already set up. Just fewer things that you have to do to get started and get up running. Oh, and you just add a page to get HTML.
OK.
Should we look more at that?
We looked at pages. Let's describe what that page actually is.
Let's talk more about Razor Pages. That's what we'll do next. I think we can probably leave this template and do a more involved template that has some Razor Pages in it. So I'm going to do File New Project and create an ASP.NET Core web app. And no, I don't think we need to save that. And the font has munged my UI a little bit, but at the top, you can see that there's these two drop-downs that are kind of cut off. That's because I upped the font to 14. But the first one lets me toggle between the .NET Core and the .NET Framework, so you can very easily select which one you want to use. And then the second one lets you pick which version of ASP.NET Core you want to use. I, of course, want to use 2.0. And I'm going to create a web application, but you can kind of see there's like two. Yeah. There's two web. It's so. It's all word-wrappy. That's kind of funny.
Should we try stretching it out?
I don't think it'll matter because I think the size for each icon is the same.
OK.
Actually, I upped the environment font. But hopefully in the back, at least you can read it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to read it. So the first three templates are kind of the standard templates we've always had. We now have two web application templates, though. The second one says Model View Controller. And that has standard model controllers and views. It's the same MVC template that we've always had.
OK.
But the default web application template now uses Razor Pages. It uses just this page-based programming model for building web UI. And we decided to make it the default because we think it's just a simpler way of doing UI. But both still work.
Okay.
Both are actually built on, they're still both MVC, so they have the same underlying feature set. They can both be used in the same app. You can have an app with some controllers and views, an app with some pages, and they can be in the same application.
They're the same thing.
Yeah, in fact, there's good reasons often to do that. Like often you want to have some pages for some UI, and then maybe some controllers for your web APIs, and we often do that in our templates, actually. So it's a very common pattern. You can use both. They are literally the same underlying framework.
So it's not like how in .NET Framework we had ASP.NET Framework, we had web pages, we have WinForms, we have web forms. It's all one thing.
Well, like one of the goals of ASP.NET Core is we wanted a unified web stack. Like we wanted to take MVC. We initially took MVC and Web API, and we said, let's make these the same. Let's not make them two different frameworks. So we merged them together, and that's what we had in 1.0 and 1.1. We always also had web pages, which is another ASP.NET framework, and we've always wanted to bring that in as well. That's what we've done with Razor Pages, is introduced a page-based model. But instead of it being a completely separate thing with completely separate code, it is literally the same infrastructure and code base underneath. It is part of MVC.
OK, so let's add some authentication to that as well.
Oh, yeah, we can do that. Like Razor Pages works with that.
So it supports that as well? OK,
yeah, absolutely.
perfect. Not that I'm testing you or anything.
That's cool. That's cool. We can do that. OK, so how do you work with Razor Pages? Well, it's MVC, so you have to add MVC and use MVC, like you saw in the first demo. And then all your Razor Pages live in this Pages folder. Let me get this app running so you can see what it looks like. And when we get it running, you'll see that it's just a standard template that we always have. It has a home page, an about page, and a contact page. And it's all bootstrap styled. It looks just like the MVC template.
So it can do whatever we did in the MVC template.
Yep, absolutely. So we've got our 3 pages. Now those 3 pages, though, are implemented as just a page. So the home page is this index.cshtml. The about page is this about.cshtml, and contact is contact.cshtml. So the routing model in Razor Pages is just however the folder structure is laid out. Those will be your routes. Like those will map to the URI.
So if I added a new folder in there.
Yeah. So we can add like let's add food folder, and then maybe we add a new page in there. Let's actually call the page bar. Let's call
foo bar.
Yeah, I know. It's so where is it? Razor page. Let's call this one, instead of index.cshtml. Index.cshtml is kind of like the default for the folder.
OK. Oh, foo bar.
Thank you.
No, foo.
I thought we had foo. Wouldn't want that. OK. So in here we'll put, hello from foo bar.
Yeah.
OK, so save. And now, if I did that right, which I think I did, I should be able to go to foo/bar. And that should work. So the app's rebuilding that page, getting it compiling. And there it is, yeah.
There it is.
That's how routing works. It's just, the folder structure, which I think a lot of people find pretty intuitive.
They do, because when you learn how to build web pages that do nothing, like in high school, it's all put in different folders, and if you go to this/this/this, that's where you are in the hierarchy of the folders. The same kind of concept?
Yeah, very, very similar. It's exactly the intuition that we're using here. Now, again, this is still MVC, so all the MVC features still apply. Like we have a layout file, just like you would in MVC. It's the same layout syntax. We have a partial, like partials work in Razor Pages. We have a view imports file. Those work in Razor Pages. View start, all that stuff is exactly the same. Now, one thing that people often ask when they see Razor Pages is, well, with MVC, one of the goals was that separation of concerns. Like you want to make sure that your view and your controller, that those are separate, that you're not having like business logic inside your view. And you can still do that with Razor Pages. Razor Pages supports that model.
But where is it?
So notice that there's these code behind files for each of the pages. So index.cshtml.cs. That is the code behind for the home page, and it is what we call a page model. Okay. That's where you put all your business logic. That's where you put your model interactions, is in your page model. You reference a page model from a Razor page using the @model directive. That's the model for your page. So then you can access any properties on that page model, use them to drive creation of forms and model binding. When you send requests to the page, on your page model, you can define what we call page handlers to handle those requests. Like this page model has an onGet page handler that doesn't currently do anything. If you wanted to handle a post request, you would have onPost. They're very similar to action methods. Like they can return iActionResult and leverage the whole action result ecosystem. But they're driven, instead of by action name, they're driven by the HTTP verb. So get requests go to onGet, post goes to onPost, and so forth. Now, one of the things that Razor Pages really shines at is forms-based UI. Like if you want to just create a form and handle it, like it is super simple in Razor Pages. Let me show you. What I want to do is I want to go to this contact page. I'm going to add a form where a person can provide their name and their email address and then learn about our great products. Right? We can then contact them and make their lives better. So let's add a form to the contact page. Here's the contact page. I'm going to go to the page model for the contact page, and let's add a class. Let's call it contact. And we'll add a couple strings on here, like the name, and we'll add a string email address. All right, and then we should probably add some validation logic on these things.
So you want it to be required.
Yeah, let's make these guys required. It's just a data annotation. Let's make the email address also required.
And an email.
Oh, yeah, we should make sure it's actually an email address, so we can do that as well. Make sure it's an email address. And now I'm just going to define a property on my page model of type contact. Okay, and so this now will be accessible through the page, like I can access that property. So let's go write our form. Let me put it about right here. So here I would do form method equals post, and then I would add like a label and ASP-4 using a tag helper.
You're seeing the tag helper, so
yeah.
This tag has support.
So I can get the contact property off of the model and then get its name and so forth. Now, I could type this all out. I'm going to save a little time. I've got it in my snippet manager tool.
Oh, what fancy
here.
tool is that?
This is Notepad. It's
that's a pretty cool
very
one.
reliable snippet manager. And we'll just paste that in. But as you can see, this form is very simple. It just has two fields. It has the name, it has the email address, and it's using tag helpers all over the place. You may notice that the form doesn't have an action attribute at all. That's because the form tag helper knows, well, this is a page, and by default, we'll just make the form post to the page. That's the most logical thing to do. So you don't even need to have an attribute for that at all. It just works. OK, let's make sure that's showing up on the page. If I refresh, I should now see a little form.
Something's happening. There
it is. OK.
It doesn't really do anything, does it?
No, like when I click the submit button, it doesn't go anywhere yet. So that's where we need a page handler. Like we need to add a page handler for that form post. So let's go back.
How do you do that? Is it any different?
Well, it's very similar. So it's a method on your page model instead of on your controller. I'm going to write a method for on post. Like the difference is that you handle it based off of the HTTP method. So I am going to return iAction result. So I'm going to use action results just like you would in MVC actions. And here, this is going to be called on post. And then inside this method, what do we want to do? So the normal MVC thing, right, is first thing you got to check the model state, right? Is model state valid? So is it valid? And if it's not valid, then we're just going to return the page. We'll return the page action result, which just renders the page so that you can see the validation errors. If it is valid, then here's where you would save to the database and all that stuff. I'm not going to do that in this demo.
You're not going to do that today?
But if, we do then want to, like normally you post, and if it's successful, you then redirect and get. So you avoid reposting on like F5 refresh. So I'm going to return redirect, and I'm just going to redirect back to the page itself.
But how does our data survive the journey?
Oh, right, I need the actual name and email address. So, normally you do that with model binding, right? So like I could, and this would work, I could put a contact parameter right here and call it contact, and model binding would just do its thing. But I have this contact property here already. Like, why don't I just use that? So I'm going to use a new feature in Razor Pages where I can say bind property. And that just means model binding, please bind the contact information to this property when a request comes in. And that will then just work. So I can just leverage that property. To show that that actually works, like maybe we should display some sort of a success message to say that, yeah, thank you, whoever you are, we got your email address. Let's do that. So we've already got a message property on this page model, which is convenient. So let's say message equals, we use some string interpolation. Thanks, contact.name. We will contact you shortly via contact.email, right?
Yep.
OK, so that's a message. And then we just need to display that on the page. Except it's going to do a redirect. So like I've set up my message on my page model, but then we're going to redirect. And so that page model instance is not even going to be there anymore. So we need a way to have that message survive across that redirect. Now, MVC has a feature for doing that. It's called temp data. Temp data is basically a place where you can stash away a little bit of data that will survive one hop. And it's built exactly for this kind of scenario. I could explicitly go to the temp data property and set a string here and set this message into temp data. But there's a better way.
There is?
There is. In Razor Pages, we added this feature where you can take a property and attribute it with temp data. And what that will do is that property now will be backed by temp data. When you set that property, it'll get set into temp data. When you read from the property, it'll be read from temp data. And that temp data is like preserved in a little cookie that will then survive across the redirect request. So we can then just read it back out from the property and be done. So let's see. We set the property, that set message, that sets into temp data. We then do the redirect. The redirect will result in a GET request back to my page, which will land me on the onGet page handler, which has this little bit of code which clears out my message. So I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to remove that, and that should be it. Let's just make sure that message is being displayed, and it is. Like, here's the message. It's a header. Let's change the styling just a little bit. I'm going to change this to a p tag and say class text success. Let's make it a success message.
And you have all that rich support for Bootstrap as well.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. The HTML editor is pretty good. Let's see if it works. OK, I'm going to try just submitting with nothing and see if validation kicks in.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, OK. So then provide my required parameters. So let's add those. Let's say if I put something here, though, that's not an email address. Yeah, OK, so it's not an email address. I'm getting validation. Let's put a real email address. So let's put my email address in here. And voila. So I hit post. It went to the server. It set up that message. It then did a redirect. It then displayed that message on the view. So it says, thanks, Dan. We will contact you shortly via droth@microsoft.com. So that's how easy it is to do forms-based UI with Razor Pages. It works for simple things. It works for big, large, enterprise-scale applications. It can do it all. It's also worth noting that the new features I showed, like bind property, temp data, these don't just work in Razor Pages.
They'll work in MVC as well.
They also work on your controllers now. Because it's the same, like Razor Pages is MVC. The same features apply to both. So you can, if you want to use those features in your MVC controllers, you absolutely can.
Right.
Okay, so that's Razor Pages.
So you've done a form, and I've seen contact. It would be nice to see some authentication.
Yeah, so we should talk about
We should talk about it, yeah.
Okay, so next, let's talk about the revamped authentication model. Now, I've set up auth in this template. Like we checked the checkbox in the File New Project dialog. So this template has auth. We have revamped auth in ASP.NET Core. The main reason in 2.0, and the main reason why we did that was in 1.1, the way you did auth is you had a middleware per auth type, or auth scheme is what we often call it.
Yeah, because you had a middleware for Facebook, you had a middleware for Microsoft, for Google,
for cookies,
for everything.
OpenID Connect, for JotBear. We had a rich set of middleware that could handle lots of different kinds of authentication. The problem with that model was that it was too easy to misconfigure two middleware so that they conflicted with each other. Like maybe you configured two middleware so that they both were trying to actively authenticate, and then they would bump heads and cause problems. So what we did in ASP.NET Core 2.0, the main change, as we go look at our startup CS, is now there is just one middleware. Like if we look in our configure method, there's just use authentication. There's the one authentication middleware. That will handle auth. That allows us to coordinate across all the different auth schemes. And then you configure authentication schemes by adding services instead of adding middleware.
That makes sense.
I mean, given that it's a dependency injection-based system, it's kind of how you would expect that to really work. If we go back up into configure services, we can see that we're already adding identity.
Yeah.
That's already adding cookie-based authentication as an auth scheme, as a service. Under the covers, that's what it does. But we can add more. Like, let's go ahead, let's add a social login. So I'm going to do services dot. Now, to do a social login, you first need to call add authentication.
Okay.
That just ensures that the core authentication services are in place. But then on top of that, you can then say, like, let's add Microsoft account. All right? And in here, that's where you can set up the options for setting up the Microsoft account authentication. The main two options that you need for Microsoft account is you need a client ID and a client secret.
Yeah,
client ID and client secret. So normally you would want these out of configuration. Well, I think this guy has config being injected already from the host, and it does. So I can just use that. So let's say configuration. What do we want? Let's read the convention I like to use is authentication, then the type of authentication. So Microsoft account, and then client ID.
Okay.
All right, and then we also need a client secret. So let's do the same thing, but we'll just switch this over to client secret, and then the config property that I want to client secret as well. Okay, so now I'm reading those out of config. So now I just need to provide them from config. Like I need to put them in some place in a config file. I could put them in app settings.json. That would be one place I could put them.
But that doesn't seem too secret.
Secure.
No, it
Yeah,
doesn't
so
seem good.
you don't want to put your app secrets in appsettings.json because then you might check them into like GitHub, and then they'll be public to the world because everyone can see what's in GitHub, which a lot of people have done.
I have done that. I have openly done that. I'm sorry.
Some people on our team may or may not have also done that by accident. So we don't want that to happen. So that's why we introduced this idea of this user secrets configuration source. It's a very simple idea. It's just another JSON file that's tucked away in your user profile that the config system knows how to find and read from, but it's not in your project, so you won't accidentally check it in. It's just another place to get secrets from. It's for development purpose only. It's not like an encrypted key vault-like thing. It's just another place to put secrets so they don't accidentally make it into source control.
So if I'm going into production, I would put it into Azure Key Vault or something?
Something like Azure Key Vault is probably what you would use for like a production secret. But for this case, on my dev machine, this user secrets mechanism works great. So
how do I add the user secrets?
There's a nice little gesture in VS. You can right-click on your project because you can have user secrets per project, and I can say Manage User Secrets.
I remember that being a tool in the previous
There's
version.
also a command line interface. Everything we do has a VS experience and a CLI, so you can also do .NET user secrets.
That's what I'm used to because VS Code.
Yeah. Okay, so again, I think I have this in my snippet management tool.
What's your secrets?
No, well, just to get started, I think I have the client ID. So let me grab this, and I'll just put that in my secrets.json. So I now have the client ID, and I need the client secret.
Yeah.
I actually have the client secret in my snippets tool, but I don't want anyone to see it. It's secret, right? You don't want to be sharing your secret.
So you want everyone to close their eyes?
Actually, Notepad has this new feature, this new encryption feature. So it works like this, and then there, okay, and then we just need to, re-encrypt it, okay. I think that worked. Did I do that? Yeah, okay. So now Visual Studio has the same encryption feature. So I'm going to go down here, yeah, and Control Set and Control Set. I think, yeah, I close it. So you have to trust me that it's there because it's secret. You can't know what my secret is.
What is your secret key again?
I'm not telling you. All right, so. So now it should be available through configuration. So I should be able to run the app, or actually it's already running, so it should work. Let's go to login.
Okay.
Let's see if that worked. Hopefully if I saved everything, it will have already rebuilt itself. On the login page, if we set up, yeah, so now we have a Microsoft button. Now I need to do one more thing here actually. This will hop me over to Microsoft account, and I can select an account to log in with. But you need to actually register the application's URI with the Microsoft account system so that it knows this is an OK place. No, this is actually the app that should be allowed to log in. So let me grab this host import, this particular port, and I'll just go over there really quick. So apps.dev.microsoft.com. Now, unfortunately, there's no way for me to do this without you seeing the first couple characters of my secret. So if you use the new quantum computing stuff, this might make it easier for you to crack my secret.
Yeah,
but
I've kept the names. I got
this is the app, and you can see I've been practicing this demo. So let me add another redirect URI, and sign in Microsoft is the path that I need to use. So let's save that. And this takes a minute or a couple seconds to propagate through the Microsoft account system before it'll let me actually log in. But if I stall long enough with you, then it should work fine. So let's try it.
What's your key, Dan?
I'm not telling you. It's a secret. And okay, it worked. I came back to my app. It now wants to set up that there's a user with identity in the database, and I hadn't set up the database yet. So I'm going to run migrations. And that should take a very short period of time. Okay, great. And then, yeah, great. So now it's asking me what local username do I want to use with my app, register that user, and we're good to go. So now I've logged in. That's how you use the new authentication system. Just add services instead of adding middleware. Now there's other cool new stuff too. Like if we look at I've clicked on the manage page for my account. You can see we redid the UI in the templates for the managed user UI. It's a little bit nicer.
And there are more options.
A lot more options. Like I can set up I'm going to set up a local password in addition to my Microsoft account. So let's do that.
1, 2, 3, ABC?
No. And then I can see what logins I have. I could remove my Microsoft account login if I wanted to. But what's really cool is now there's two-factor auth using authenticator apps.
So it goes back that we don't need a third-party provider like SendGrid.
Don't need to set up
Twilio.
SMS. I mean, you can still do it that way if you want, but this is a lot easier. So let's add an authenticator app. And on this page, you can see normally you would download a two-factor authenticator app like the Microsoft Authenticator, or you could use the Google one. And normally there would be like a QR code here that you take a picture of. The template doesn't have a QR code generator by default, but we have a doc that tells you how you can pretty easily add it. There's just a little JavaScript library that you can grab, and actually it's very simple. Like I'll show you how easy it is. Like if I go to www.root, and I'm just going to add an existing item to my lib folder for a static file. I think I tucked it away in here. This QR code.js. Just add that there.
So where did you add that?
I added it into the www.root folder under lib.
Okay.
Okay, and then there's just a little code snippet that you grab from this doc, which will add that script and then inject it into the right element on the page. And this page is what is pages, account, manage, enable, authenticator. That's the HTML. So let's go to pages, account, manage, enable, authenticator, CSHTML. Okay, great. And I think it's
where I expected it to be.
this thing that I have to replace. So save.
And
now,
what is that piece of code telling you doing?
that code is first, loading up the QR code generation script, and then it's finding a particular element on this page and replacing it with the actual generated QR code. So if we go back to the app now, that's not it. Here, and I think if I refresh this page. Yeah, so now I get a QR code. So I should just be able to take a picture with my phone and I'm good to go. And you could set it up. That's a little hard to demo in front of an audience like this, like me showing you my phone and stuff. So instead, to just show you that this does work, there's like this little online authenticator app, it's good for demo purposes. It's just basically an authenticator app in the browser. It's this guy here. So let's remove this one. And so I'm just going to copy the key from here and put it, and create a new one. Let's do like ignite demo, and I'll put the key here, and that will give me, that time-bound code. So 386-924, 386-924, 386-924. Is that right?
No, it was 5 at the end.
No, is it? Is it?
No, it was 4.
Verify. Okay, so that worked. And this gives me now, what it's giving me is a bunch of recovery codes. So if I lose my phone, I can still log in with these one-time use recovery codes. So this is all just there in the templates. You can just use it. Now these are important because if I ever lose my phone, I want to be able to log in. So I'm going to, of course, put them in a very safe spot.
Notepad.
I'm going to put them in, my store, my recovery code store. If we go back to this tab, you can see I can disable 2FA, reset the recovery codes, configure another authenticator app, and so forth. So let's see if that worked. So I'm going to now log in. I think my email address here was daniel.roth@microsoft.com, and then the password I set up. And let's log in. So I'm getting challenged. Now, how do I know this really does anything? Let's just see if that does anything. Okay, so I really have to type in an actual authenticator code. So let me go back to the app. I've got 10 seconds. 388-933. 388-933. And log in.
Whoa.
Okay, so two-factor auth. It's just there. It just works out of the box. Those, thank you. Now those recovery codes, those work as well. So if I try this, I logged out. Let me try to log back in again. And let's say, I lost my phone. It fell in the toilet, and it's no longer any good. Fortunately, there's a link down here in the bottom, log in with recovery codes. And fortunately, I saved them in that very, very safe spot. So we can grab one of these things, and these one-time use codes then allow me to get in, and then I can reconfigure my account profile. So that's the two-factor authentication support in ASP.NET Core 2.0. There's actually a talk later this week by Barry Dorrance, where he will go into much more detail and depth on these features, and you should definitely go check that out.
Definitely check it out.
So that's Razor Pages, that's auth. Getting started is quick. ASP.NET Core 2.0, what do you think? It's pretty good?
I'm pretty impressed. I'm happy with what I've seen so far.
Great.
I'm really excited. What about you guys? Yeah. Yay! So when we're looking at the file new templates, we glanced over the SPA template integration that we have right now.
There were SPA templates.
There were a few SPA templates.
Yeah.
So I was watching this video by Steve Sanderson, who created Knockout.js and does all that Spark stuff for us.
He does. Like Steve Sanderson actually helps us bridge the world of .NET and
JavaScript
yes.
and bring it all together. So let's have a look at what that looks like. So can we switch over to my machine,
Yeah,
which
sure.
is 2?
You're going to show us some SPA.
I'm going to show you some SPA, like a quick intro to what I know so far in SPA. OK, so to get started, you go to File, New Project, ASP.NET Core, and just like you, I have a wonky setup right now.
But the icons are cool.
But the
look at
icons
them.
are cool.
You can see
like,
angular, little, like red thing. Yeah, it's
exactly.
nice. It's got colors.
It's got colors
Maybe
to
we
it.
should talk to the Visual Studio design team about
You
this.
guys need some colors. You need some
colors.
purple with the bot. It would be cool. Okay. So we have Angular support, React.js, React, and how do Americans pronounce it? Redux?
I say Redux. Yeah, I say Redux.
You say Redux?
Yeah.
OK, Redux. OK. But I am going to show you the Angular app. Now, it takes a while for all the npm packages to get updated and restored. So I have not cheated, but prepared ahead of time. Kind of like when you watch a cooking show and they're like, this is one that we made earlier.
Like out of the oven comes
the apple pie or the turkey or this or so. Think about this as the turkey.
The npm restored, it'll happen automatically when you create those templates, but it does take a little, like a minute or so.
So, yeah.
It's like 100 megabytes of stuff that has to be downloaded.
It's quite a bit of stuff, so quite a bit of JavaScript coming down.
Once you've done it once, though, it's fast after that.
It's really fast after that. So I have my prepped Angular app, so let's go ahead and run it and see what it looks like.
Okay.
OK. So
what is this thing?
what does this thing
do? What does it have in it?
It is a very fancy template. Wait and see.
I'll be patient. I'll be patient.
It's getting up and running. OK. There we have it.
So that's the Chrome debugger integration with Visual Studio kicking in there. That allows you to set breakpoints in VS, and even though you're running in Chrome, you can hit JavaScript breakpoints from within VS. It's pretty nice. But there's the app.
You've actually done a prelude to the other part of my demo.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Keep going.
OK. So this is, let's zoom in so you guys can see it. You guys can see it at the back? Good? Happy? All right, so we have a counter app. This gives you a little bit of information about the support that we have for Angular, like client-side navigation, server-side pre-rendering, Webpack for the middleware, hot module replacement, and so on. Right?
That's a lot of stuff.
It's a lot of stuff.
Like I know I've talked to a bunch of customers that trying to use Angular, React, or Reactless Redux, and these technologies. And I know that one of the things that can be difficult is just getting the project up and running, like getting everything put together and configured correctly, so then you can start working on things. And the nice thing about these templates is file new project and you're ready to go. It's already set up for you. It's
right there in there. So we actually can have, let's look at the code a little, right? So we have, I'm going to stop this. We have our counter app in our client app. Looks pretty basic. OK, that's a test app. This is probably an assignment you did your first day in CS. You remember doing this?
Doing what?
A counter app.
Oh, yeah.
Just the increments going up and down.
Yeah.
But the cool thing, as you mentioned, is hot module replacement. And when I saw this, I thought it was absolutely amazing.
Okay.
Do you trust me?
I do. Tell me. I've heard of hot module replacement. That's a Webpack thing, right?
It's a Webpack thing.
What does it do for me?
OK. So I want to run the app again.
OK.
Let's do some side-by-side, because I feel like it's more impactful when you do side-by-side. Something is happening, I promise. OK. There we go. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to open up some developer tools while it's doing that. So F12. You see HRM?
Oh, down in their console.
Right
like
there?
Yes, I do see it.
Can you see it in the back?
Now it's much bigger. Yeah,
it's much bigger? OK.
So HMR, hot module replacement.
Yes.
OK.
It took me a while because I thought it was Her Majesty Regent something, but no, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I grew up in the UK, so that joke has not landed well at all. It has not, you're like, what is this? What is this? All right? So I want to go over to the Fetch Data app, and let's change. So this is all uppercase. Let's say I want to change this around and make it lowercase. So I'm going to get rid of that.
Like the different descriptions of the weather.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
The summary, save it. Oh, sorry, not save it that way. Let's just save it the old-fashioned way. And you should see an update.
Is that hot module replacing?
It's supposed to be hot module replacing.
Do you have to run the debugger to get it to work, or does it just work with Control F5 as well?
It works with Control F5. Okay, let's try that again.
So if I remember what Webpack does, Webpack is a module bundler, right?
Yes.
Like it takes all the different pieces of your front-end application, all the JavaScript pieces, modules, the TypeScript, the Sass and Less, and figures out how to compile it all, and it grovels through everything to figure out what are all the dependencies.
Yes, it does.
And then it now knows about all those dependencies, and it can compile your TypeScript and then bundle everything together and serve it for your application. And so hot module replacement, I think what it's supposed to do is when you edit one piece, like one module, it knows about the whole graph. So we can just say, I'm going to update that one piece in the browser and leave the rest alone, like leave the things that don't need to be updated without being touched.
Without being touched. And let's have a look at what that is. Okay. So I am going to change this to uppercase,
Save that.
Save that.
Something's happening.
Something's happening.
Okay, that's cool. That's cool.
And it took me a while when I started playing around with Angular and playing around with HMR was not refreshing.
Yeah, you kept wanting to go refresh anyway.
I kept wanting to refresh, and then I
don't
go
need
over,
to. No,
and then
stop.
I don't have to click. It just works.
Yeah, so you just edit the code and just the module gets. So if you have other state in your application, like some state that you've set up, but you update a different module, that state can stay. Like it doesn't have to get blown away when you refresh the whole application.
No,
so it can be really.
It will actually stay there.
So there must be some server-side piece that's making that really nice. I think there's some middleware. I think that.
There's some middleware within ASP.NET Core that enables you to do that.
That's talking back and forth with the browser to make sure that happens. Cool.
So actually, if you go over here. And I think we'll probably, over in your startup.
Yeah,
boom.
Use Webpack Dev middleware is enabling that seamless development experience around hot module replacement. All right, that's cool. Well, what else can it do? Does it do anything?
So we're almost out of time, but there is one last thing I do want to show you. And if you want to see more about Angular and ASP.NET Core, check out Steve Sanderson's video on Channel 9 with Seth Juarez. But I actually want to show you some of the debug features.
Okay.
Right? So we're going to go over to source. And if I do, I think it's Control-O.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do the connector. Actually, let me go back to the counter app. And let's look at the counter component.
Dot component, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
there we go in TypeScript.
Showing up.
So let's make this bigger. Right. So I can actually put a breakpoint right over here.
In the original TypeScript.
In the original TypeScript.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And you hit the breakpoint. So that's the whole source map functionality kicking into place, and that's just you didn't have to do anything.
No, I did nothing. It just was set up.
Okay. Yeah, that's nice.
So think about quick deving, if you want to just do it really quick, don't want to mess around with your code, you can do it right here in the browser, have that rich debug experience.
So hot module replacement, source debugging, like in TypeScript, using the source maps, I think like I saw like the spec files in there, like it looks like it has tests and
It has
Karma
tests,
integration.
comma integration. All you have to go is go to your command line and write npm test, and we'll kick off Karma for you.
Can we show the network, like the pre-rendering thing? I think is also. I know we are getting short, but like refresh the whole page with like a Control F5.
Yeah.
Like a full refresh.
Okay, we're doing that. And you'll see, wait at the network.
Okay, so things that I think is cool about this is the templates are already set up with pre-rendering. So what that actually means is like on the server, it's actually running Node, and there's like interaction between .NET code and Node where it will run Angular on the server to pre-render the HTML and spit it down really, really fast. That's that first like.
That's the first line
request.
where you just saw that.
And then everything else that happens in the background where it downloads the rest of the JavaScript and gets things up and running. That's Angular pre-rendering. It's a kind of an advanced feature to set up, but in these templates, it's just that. Like you just get it, which is super nice. Like
cool.
It's great that Steve spent all that time and effort and pain like figuring out how to put those things together so that we don't have to.
We don't have to think about that
wonderful
anymore.
thing.
Right out of the box. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left.
Yeah.
So I think a really cool thing to show, just to complete the cycle of life,
Okay.
is let's deploy this application.
Okay.
Yeah. And look at some of the cool.
Do you want me to do the Razor Pages app, or is that?
No, we're going to do look at some app insights.
Oh, the app insights. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So let me switch back then. Okay. So the last theme we had for ASP.NET Core 2.0 was seamless diagnostics. So
Yeah.
I've already got this app open, so might as well just use it. Instead of running it without the debugger, let me actually run it in the debugger. So one of the nice things about ASP.NET Core 2.0 is we have the ability to inject or light up additional functionality in your app without you having to add any code. For example, by running in Visual Studio, we can hook up logging providers into like the App Insights Visual Studio UI, so you can get all those features for free without you having to do anything.
So you don't have to configure App Insights into your application. You don't have to write a single line of code.
Not a single line, and this isn't using like the cloud service. This is just like local
Locally.
VS development features. So if I look in the diagnostic tools, you'll see. Let me like make this a little bigger so we can actually. Let me click on some things like home, about, contact, and if I go back to the this view, I can see all these App Insights events are firing. And the last one is that GET request to the contact page. So that's getting picked up. This is sort of a simple UI that App Insights is lighting up for us. But if I click on this Application Insights button, then I get this very rich interactive UI for searching through all the ASP.NET Core logging. Like I can see, like there's my GET request to the contact page. If I click on that guy, there's this additional UI where I can see. I wish I could move it up. Let's see. Let me lower these guys so that we get a little more space. I can see details about that particular request. And if I click on the track operations, not only that, I can see like timing of the request. Like as the GET request took a total of 747 milliseconds, but I can see like the things that happened along the way. Like there's some authentication scheme thing happened, and it's executing the onGet handler page handler method, and then finally we get to the end of the request. So if you're like trying to figure out like why did this request take so long, this will break down the request for you. You can filter by any of the ASP.NET Core categories. Super convenient during development when you're trying to track down issues.
And this is just locally, just to emphasize, nothing is going up to the cloud yet.
Now I've also deployed an app already to the cloud, to Azure. And we can see what that looks like. By going to Azure, Azure actually knows that this is an ASP.NET Core application. And so Azure can then offer to light up additional services for you for your app. Like it can, for example, automatically instrument your app for App Insights if you want it to. Like it'll ask you and say, like, do you want to use App Insights? We can do that for you. And you can say, yeah, sure, that would be great. So here in App Services, I think I've got an app that I've previously done, this application, Web Application 32 Ignite. Now, when I open the app service, If we wait a second, like at the top, it says like, hey, by the way, you can access application insights for monitoring and profiling your ASP.NET Core app. It knows it's an ASP.NET Core app. If I click on that, that will bring me over to App Insights. It gives me the option here, if I haven't done it already, to create an App Insights resource. And then it'll actually say, like, do you want me to like start feeding data for you from the ASP.NET Core app into that resource? And it's like a gold bar that appears on the top. And you say, yeah, sure, go ahead. And when you do that, now you get all the wonderful App Insights features. Like you'll get page load times, you'll get how many requests are going through. You only get all this information about failed requests. Like I published this app initially, and then like I had messed up, I didn't set up the database correctly. And so you can see, like I could see there were some SQL exceptions that I can get details on and find out, like, well, what happened? Why am I getting a 500? Oh, post to the register action. That requires the database, and I didn't actually run a migration on the database yet. And if we give this a second, it should show me the full, yeah, there we go, the full stack trace of the exception that I can then look at. So that's super useful, and there's no code in my app that enables this.
There's no code that enables that.
Yeah, in fact, one thing that's really neat, App Insights can do the server, but it also can do the stuff that's running in the browser. Like, let me browse to this application. Let me go back to...
Go to overview?
Yeah, I want to go to the overview page, and let me browse to it. And if I browse to this application, let it come up for a second, and then I'm going to F12 and see the network real quick. Like, this is something that just sort of blew me away when I first saw it. Yeah, let's look at the DOM. That's fine. Okay. Like, in the DOM, in the header, like at the bottom here, you can see this AI.0.js. That's AI for App Insights. That's the App Insights diagnostics script that got added to my page. And I mean, I didn't add it to the page. How did that happen? Well, when I clicked the button to say, yes, please go ahead and instrument,
it just went and put it there.
It did it there. It did that. And how did it do that? Well, it used a new feature in ASP.NET Core where there's a head and body tag helper.
Are those the tag helper components?
The tag helper components. So you register tag helper components for the head and body tag helper through dependency injection. And those tag helper components get an opportunity to modify the head or the body. And so App Insights has, hooks in through ASP.NET Core Light Up and adds some services, adds some tag helper components that allows it to add that script for me without me even have to worry about anything. So that's seamless diagnostics. You can just publish to Azure and it does the right thing, running on Windows and IIS, and it's great. It's
great. We did it.
Do you want to show anything? You want to show the Docker stuff? We should do the.
We have 3 minutes.
We have 5. Do you want to see Docker real quick?
Okay.
Let's see Docker. Do the Docker stuff. Do it. You got 3 minutes.
Got 3 minutes. Okay. Let's see how fast we can go.
Switch you back.
Distract. Okay. So this makes me feel like I should have started a new project earlier. So I'm going to go File, New Project.
It's so easy, though. I bet we can do it.
Okay. Let's see. Let's do it. Okay.
That's fine. Yeah, new web app.
I'm just going to remove that because I want to show you a different way to do it. Okay.
So this was all done with Windows and IIS and publishing to App Service, which is fundamentally an IIS hosting service. What if you don't want to? What if you're in a Docker-based environment, like you want to actually build out a Docker image for your app and run it as a Docker container? Like, how do you do that? Can you do that with ASP.NET Core, and what does that look like?
You can, but before you do, you have to make sure that you have all the Docker tool support enabled on your machine.
Like Docker for Windows.
You have to make sure. And then you can also specify.
So you have a little whale in your.
You have a whale, and you can also switch between whether you wanted to switch for Windows containers or Linux containers. So I thought I would challenge myself and use Linux.
On a Windows machine.
On a Windows machine.
So a Linux container running on a Windows machine.
On a Windows machine. All right. So I created a file new project. It's application 20, which is a really cool name. I am going to enable Docker support by simply right-clicking and adding Docker support. There we go.
And that's super Linux.
For Linux.
How could that go wrong? Running a Linux Docker container. I'm assuming there's got to be a Linux VM somewhere, like the Docker for Windows sets up, that hosts that container.
Yep.
Running on a Windows machine that you're setting up from VS. So there's your Docker file.
That's my Docker
There's
file.
our default ASP.NET Core 2.0 Docker image that has just it's a runtime image that is meant for running apps in production.
Yep.
Okay.
So I'm going to run it as a Docker
Go for it. So this will do a build, and that build output isn't just a DLL. It'll build the app, but also build an image.
It will build a Docker image that has your ASP.NET Core application in it.
Okay.
Right. So you can see it's going in and doing all that nice magic. And in a second,
So how do you
can
interact with a ASP.NET Core app running in on a Linux VM, running in a Docker container, like that? That's the thing? That's
the thing. And if you don't believe me,
okay,
right, we can do Docker PS, and 22 seconds ago.
22 seconds, that first one?
The
Web
first
app
one?
20? Is that what was in VS? Show me VS.
So
Show me
this is VS.
VS was Web app 20. Yeah, it was Web
Web
app
app
20.
20.
That's cool. What if you want to run this in Azure? Can you just right-click publish? Don't actually do the publish because we don't have time. But show the. What
Yes,
happens.
I can go through the process. So let's stop this. So that is proof because other people just see, oh, it's localhost. How do I know you didn't do some smoke and mirrors in the background?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you want to publish to Azure, is it as easy? When I did mine, I right-click publish. I set up a new app service, and I just let web deploy do its thing.
So it is so different. So you right-click publish.
Oh, okay. And I clicked that button, but yours says Linux
Mine
preview.
is, it's Linux preview.
What will that do? I don't think we have time to do the whole thing, but what will it do?
So what it will do, let's make this a little bit bigger so you can have a look. It will configure your services for you. It will actually create an Azure Container Registry for you as well.
Okay.
Right? So that is where your image is going to nicely exist within Azure.
Let's scroll down. That container registry.
Yeah. And I actually, in the spirit of being prepared, I made one earlier.
Okay. Yeah, you can show that.
So if I go over to my Azure dashboard, and let's zoom in, and let's look at app services, and I can't remember what I called it. I think it might be this Docker app, because it has Docker app in it.
Sounds likely.
It sounds likely.
This is an app service. I see
it's
the little globe.
Service. Yeah, it's a little globe. Like
how do you know
it's
it's a Docker thing? How do I know it's not like a Windows thing? Like what is? So there's Docker container.
There you
right
go.
There. And then that is basically taking a Docker image from that Docker registry and deploying it to Azure App Service and running it on Linux in Azure. That's super sweet. So that's ASP.NET Core 2.0 running in Docker in Azure. Just seamless right-click and publish.
Okay.
All right, you guys are great. This is what we showed you. There is more. We have hardened Kestrel so that you can now use Kestrel as an edge server. So that is done in 2.0. We added Razor 7.1 support for C# 7.1 support to Razor. We added some additional features for Web API support like media type suffixes. Tag helper components we talked about. I-hosted startup is what enables that light up, where we can light up diagnostics for you. I-hosted services is background tasks in ASP.NET Core. Great feature. You should go check these things out. Lots of great stuff at the Ignite that you should learn about .NET. Definitely go check out the security talk that we mentioned. That's a great one. And go download it.
Download it now.
.NET Core SDK 2.0. It's super easy to do. Play around with it. Thank you for coming. Appreciate you guys for staying.